So, welcome. This is Andrea Epting with the Direct Impact Podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. We have an amazing speaker joining us, and her name is Connie Ellefson. And she is just an amazing human being. And she's an engineer. She's all kinds of things. She's an engineer. She's an author. She's a professional organizer in the Denver area. And she's helping people to just realize the positive emotion and the feel-good chemicals that can be released when they address their unnecessary clutter. So just realizing all of the positive emotion that she got when you unburden yourself with the physical things. She authored a book called Clear the Space, Feel the Rush. And it's all about how you can get started on your decluttering journey from anywhere. Did I get all of that right, Connie?
That's very good. That's a great summary.
Wonderful. So today, the overall topic is how decluttering your physical space directly impacts our mental health, and it can move us into positive emotion, which is very exciting, especially for the ADHD population like myself. We love that dopamine. We love the feelings that come with action, but it's just hard to get into action. Yeah. Exactly. So just a reminder to all of our listeners, in this podcast, the Direct Impact Podcast, we explore all the ways we might enhance our mental health and leave a positive, life-giving impact in our wake. And I believe that decluttering and getting organized can be a big part of that. Would you agree, Connie?
Exactly. Yeah, it's very powerful. And the best part about it is it's free. You don't have to pay anybody to help you with it. You could. It's a good idea sometimes if you just can't get started, but it's very intriguing, the relationship we have with our belongings.
It is, isn't it? I specialize in process addictions, behavioral addictions, and hoarding is one of the things that I work with. And it is very interesting, the relationship that we can develop with stuff.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So can you share just in your professional opinion, how spaces get cluttered to begin with?
Each person, and I just heard this line recently from another author, there's no knowing how each individual person decides to hold on to something or how they decide to live their life. And to use myself as an example, I really like uncluttered spaces, and it's hard for me to work on something really proactive, very creative, or very my work is pretty difficult, my engineering work. So if I got a lot of stuff in my peripheral vision, it's hard for me to get started. But yet I also kind of rebel against putting everything away as soon as you get done with it. I hate that. Because I hate routine. I call myself a quiet nonconformist.
I love it.
It's probably, everything that we have is to some degree a holdover from our childhood. So when I was a kid, we moved every 6 months to a year with my dad's work. So we learned to travel light, and it was always not my choice. It was, I just didn't have any choice about it. So I had a little bit of inner rebellion going on the whole time of my childhood, and it held over a long time. So all we can do is work with ourselves. And in the case of organizers, many of them will say, what's your dream for your space, or what's your dream for how you want to spend your time? Because we know that it's a lot more compelling to work towards something than away from something. So if you can see yourself, I have the freedom and flexibility to just go out on adventures all the time and not worry about how messed up the house is. And I noticed the other day I was trying to do some engineering work, and my kitchen was a little bit of a mess, disorder. And I'm like, I don't want to do my engineering work until that kitchen's cleaned up. And it was exactly that thing. It was the kitchen. It wasn't anything else in my house. It was maybe a little out of place. So each person is very individual.
I love that. Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. How people interact with their space and their things is very individualized. But I love how you just mentioned, you notice something in the kitchen. You're like, well, I can't work until that's done. I wonder if it also, triggers procrastination for you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I love that. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that kind of leads into our next question. Maybe you kind of answered it, but the connection between one's mental clutter and environmental clutter. Do you
Right.
see a close connection in the work that you do?
Yes, it's almost always related. And if you live by yourself, you only have to deal with yourself. But if you live with any other people, then each person's style is going to be different. So there's some negotiation that has to be gone over with that. So it's just a complicated thing, but it can be dealt with. And I realized that I tell the story in my book about how when I left college to start my first job, everything I owned was in my car, including a
Wow.
bicycle, a 10-speed bike, and two big speakers. And then 5 years later, I had two little boys and a husband, and we moved house. And it took me and five big guys 4.5 hours to put everything in a giant moving van. So I'm like, what happened? We got too much stuff. So I started downsizing from that point until now.
Mm.
And just looking at how we could streamline things and not have two items that would do the same function. So it's a lifelong process. And what people don't realize is they hear someone's with their new organizing book. And I have lots of organizing books. I just love them. And I got all excited with each one. But then I would go through the process, decluttering, organizing, and then I would stop at the 90% mark. I would never go all the way. So there was something
Yeah.
in there that made it terrifying to go ahead and finish up the project. But 90% is pretty good. So, but the thing you have to realize is no particular system is going to be perfect for getting you organized forever, because you're always going to have people are going to be giving you gifts. You're not going to stop going shopping.
Mm-hmm.
You may change your mind a little bit about how you shop. You may decide to curtail it hugely, but the reality is, especially in America, most of us probably have way too much stuff. So it's
Oh,
a
yeah.
process that is going to be ongoing, just like in my book I talk about physical decluttering. You're not going to eat just one delicious, nutritious meal and be good for the rest of your life. And you're not going to go work out, go for a good hard run or whatever, and then you're set. So it's a process with your belongings as well as with your emotional stuff and your physical stuff.
I
There's
like
always
that.
new stresses coming at you that you have to deal with, and that's what life is really all about. It's dealing with the things that come at you and figuring out how to respond, rather than trying to always put in resistance to blocking those things that are happening that you don't have any control over. That's not the game. The game is figuring out how you're going to react to it.
Yeah, I really like that. And I love that you use the word resistance, because
Mhm.
I work with a lot of people who they've put in really great processes and workarounds, and they have not just mentally and emotionally, but also physically and in their space. But they, like you, struggle with that last 10%. You
Mhm.
know, it's the hang up, and
Mhm.
working through that hang up, it can be very challenging. How do you do it?
I don't. I just don't worry about
I, love,
it.
I don't.
Well, I
Well, but I do love the attitude of, you know what? I just pay attention to the 90%
right.
and I give myself grace for the 10%.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. And I was actually in a house when my kids were teenagers. I would visit one of their friends, and they were quite a bit less. They had less belongings around in the family room. For
Mhm.
example, I couldn't see really anything. Like I couldn't see a board game or a book, and I felt kind of uncomfortable. I was like, oh, this is really sparse. This is way too sparse even for
Mhm.
me. And
Mhm.
yet they were a happy family with, two or three kids, and they seemed to feel very comfortable. So it's just amazing how individual it is. And but I also like to try to make it fun. My number one tip for decluttering for all three of the areas of clutter that I talk about, the
Uh-huh.
mental, the emotional, the mental and emotional, the physical, and then the possessions, is first declutter the guilts. And that's something you have to do all the time, every day, because most of us grow up with way more guilt than we really need. We've been
Mm.
trained by some diligent humans to try to teach us how to be a human, and they overdid it. So
That's well put. Mhm.
yeah, so we have to give ourselves a break. almost all the time.
Okay.
And realize that the emotional part is probably the biggest part of any clutter game. But game is a key word, because that's how I get myself to get inspired to clean up. I make a game of it. So I'll work on my work for half an hour, and then I'll take a 10-minute break, and I'll say, can I put away 15 or 20 things in 10 minutes? And so for me, it's more fun to let things disintegrate a little bit and then scurry around and try to beat the clock than
Uh-huh.
to constantly being, putting everything away as soon as I get done with it. So I still have that small amount of resistance to staying constantly organized. So you just have to figure out what works for you. And I do remember with sometimes people that had called me in to help them, and I noticed that there was things out all over the counters and tables and everything, but then I'd look in the cupboards and they'd be almost empty. So it was like they were afraid to get it out of sight because they hadn't figured out a good system to either remind themselves that it was still there, or they didn't feel comfortable about organizing it so that they go ahead and put it away. So it was just kind of an interesting thing that I got a kind of a kick out of. But um, it's just, life is an ongoing game, and you have to find out what makes it fun. Because if you're not having fun with it, if you're beating yourself up or somebody else is beating you up, then hopefully just mentally about your stuff, then you're gonna dig in your heels.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you help people identify kind of like their pain points,
Mhm.
and you're looking at that guilt, or what we call toxic shame, because
Uh-huh.
nobody's made a mistake. It's
Right.
shame.
Exactly.
And so it's like, let's go ahead and address that internal piece. And then you move into the emotional unburdening. And then it's like, now we can tackle this and make it fun.
Right.
I love,
Exactly.
I love that process.
So
um,
in my book, I have several strategies you could use to help yourself get over the hump. It's always the first few items that you're trying to get rid of that's the hardest. And then once you get going, then you start feeling those endorphins flowing through your body. And as you mentioned, dopamine. And it starts to feel fun. And sometimes you may actually get to the point where you throw too much stuff away, but because it just feels so good. But to try to harness that power to like help you get over the hump. So if it's looking at some dream for your time or whatever strategy, so you could either just do something simple like talk to your friends about it or journal, or you could, I talk about several energy healing methods, and the easiest and most impactful one is emotional freedom technique, or tapping. That's
mhm.
a super easy way to get yourself out of, for me, it was clearly fight or flight when I got to the 90% mark. So to be able to do some tapping and get myself past that and go, oh, this really isn't the disaster that I think it is. So you can kind of go back and forth. And I heard someone say, oh, you've come to the club today to clear your head, get some exercise. So I'm decluttering my body and I'm decluttering my head at the same time. So you can put two together.
Would you mind, Connie, walking our listeners through your tapping process?
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So I would, maybe I'm starting to work on a project with my engineering. So, but I don't really want to get started. I just want to keep tidying up the house or whatever. So I would start tapping on the side of my hand. And I learned that it's nothing, it's not very, there's lots of play in how you tap. It doesn't have to be any particular way. So we can tap on the side of our hand. I even do it sometimes when I'm driving. I'll just tap on the steering wheel, the side of my hand, and just make a statement 3 times. Even though I really don't want to get started on this work, I love and accept myself. Or even though I would rather just play than do this work, that's how I feel, and that's okay. So you're saying, even though this is the problem, I'm still an okay person. So you say that 3 times. And then you
Yeah.
start tapping around the points around your face, the inside of the eyebrow.
Hmm.
It's okay. I really don't want to do this. I hate all this engineering. I never want to do it again. I certainly don't want to do it today.
Okay.
And you keep tapping around the 9 points around your face and head, or I guess it's
Mhm.
8, and then the one you start with. You don't go back to this one again. You just go around your face and head. And
Okay.
then
So
so like,
it looked like you started because we're also on video for our listeners.
Yeah.
You started above your brow, and then you went
Yes.
around your eyes to your
It's,
cheeks.
yeah, it's the inside of your eyebrow, somewhere in that area, and then the side of your eye. And these are all endpoints of the meridians that are used in acupuncture. So that's why they affect your body. And it's it's a very physical technique. It's not anything woo-woo. That's what's so cool about it.
Oh, there's a lot of science behind it.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I just want the listeners to be able to implement it. And then you're working your way down
until. So then underneath the bone underneath your eye, you tap on that lightly a few times, three or four times. And then you tap underneath your nose, in between your nose and lip. And that's the end point of two meridians. One comes up around the back of your body and one comes up the front. And then you tap on your chin. And you can use either one or 2 points. There's a point about 1 inch below your collarbone. And again, you can just be very proximate. It doesn't have to be too specific, but tap on that area. That's the end of the kidney meridian. And then maybe hard to see, but you're tapping underneath your armpit, 2 or 3 inches. If you're a woman, it would be where your bra might be. So you tap on that for a few seconds, and then you go to the top of your head, and then you circle around. You just keep going through those same motions. It doesn't have to be a certain number at each point. It just could be whatever you feel like. So the cool thing about it is you go ahead and say all the negative things that we as Americans have been taught. Never say that about yourself. Never downplay yourself, because you're trying to scramble that message that you're circling around inside your body. So you just keep saying all these negative things. I must be a terrible person because I don't want to work, and stuff like that. And then after a few, maybe 3 or 4 rounds of tapping, you may start to feel a little bit, that's the endorphins again. They're coming up while you're doing this tapping, and that's what calms down your fight or flight, your amygdala part of your brain. And then you might start saying, okay, I know I don't really want to do this, but I've done it before and I could probably do it again.
I like to call it a disruptor and a challenger. So you are disrupting and challenging those negative thoughts and confronting them in a way that says, is that true? And then you can kind of replace it while implementing the disruption, right? The physical disruption. And I love that you utilize that technique when you're feeling stuck, or when you notice some of that negative or old or toxic dialogue coming up.
Exactly.
That's great.
It's pretty foolproof. It doesn't even really matter what you say. You could just be going, so it's super easy. And a lot of people, they don't start because they think, I don't know what to say. Well, say whatever. And I've listened to lectures where they're talking about a topic where I think, that's not really applied to me, but I'll do it anyway. And I'll go through their their sequences, and oh man, I just feel so much better. Or something will come up and remind me, oh yeah, that is how this applies to me. So it's super fun, really fast. And it's a great way to get through something that you're scared about starting, or just, have to do something stressful.
And just that getting started part. I feel like so many of our listeners get stuck at start. Exactly. And some people can get into action. They can move into action with some of the workarounds you're talking about, but they get stuck at the tail end, the finish, a lot of anxiety around completion. And honestly, a lot of us start to exhibit some anxiety or dread around completion because there's no more dopamine or feel good chemicals coming at the end.
Well, thank you. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're programmed, right? We've got these amazing supercomputers, operating in our brains and bodies. And it's like, yeah, we're programmed like that. We know it's coming. There's a piece of our brain that knows, oh, I'm about to have a letdown.
Okay.
And then I have to get started again. Oh my goodness. And there's some anxiety around that too. Absolutely. And so you really answered a lot of questions, I feel like, for our neurodivergent population. Anybody on the spectrum, or anybody, diagnosed ADHD, anybody who's ADHD, OCD type, or more of a disorganized type, because everything you named was like a really important workaround, like setting a timer or just chunking it up and saying, well, I'm just going to do 20 minutes of that. And so I feel like you answered a lot of questions around that. But I've got I'm curious about something.
Okay.
Do people, you said, you, well, I'll ask you, do you feel like people tend to go to extremes when they start to declutter?
Well, yes, that depends on the person, of course.
Okay.
And you hear different the famous Ms. Marie Kondo, she says we should do it all at once. We should get our books all together from the whole everywhere in our house, and we should work on the whole pile at once. And for some people that because it does take a few days to work through that, it's just too disruptive to have that pile. And I think there's nothing wrong with doing a small section at a time, like a closet or even a drawer, because that kind of gives you the fuel for the next part. In
Mm,
my book, I talk about 10 or so different things that might, or reasons that might inspire you. For me, I'm a big conservationist, so I hate wasting energy. And
mhm.
then I think, well, this item that I never used, and even though maybe I could use it someday, as long as it's stuck in my house, then all the energy that went into producing that item is also going to waste. So if I donate it to the local thrift store and somebody else uses it, then that energy is being renewed. And so that's a big inspiration for me. For
Mhm.
most people, the absolute never fails inspiration is invite people over or have people come into your house.
That is why I entertain. Honestly, it is the only reason I entertain is to make sure that I'm, forced
Yeah.
to get on top of the things in the house. Yeah. I mean, hey, it
We
works.
have to
Works for me.
we have to respect our cave person.
Mhm.
You know, our hardwiring is we don't want to look bad in the eyes of other people, or we don't want to look like a slovenly housekeeper because maybe we'll get kicked out of the tribe or whatever. So
Yeah.
there's a real ingrained, especially I think in women. I'm not sure if I know some men have it too, but yeah, to not look bad in the eyes of the others.
Yeah.
And then realize that with, as you said, getting started, there's also an instinct to, even if we're looking forward to something like, yeah, we're going to go out for ice cream when we get done and we're like, we don't want to go out the door because we've been safe doing what we've been doing the last few
Mhm.
minutes. So we should probably we want to keep doing that thing rather than switch to even something that we're looking forward to. So we just have to be very kind to ourselves and do the tapping or whatever works for you to get you over the hurdle to get
Yeah.
started to the next activity or the next step.
Well, I
And
have two comments there, Connie. One comment is I love that your approach is to start small, identify something small, because what you're doing there is you're strengthening those neural pathways that says I can start, I can finish, and this feels good. I can
yeah,
start, I can finish, and this feels good. I can start, I can finish, this feels good, without making it a tremendous project that maybe you can't finish.
mhm,
Or maybe you have a tendency to underestimate how much time something takes. A lot of us struggle with that. So I really do. I like that approach. And I also like that you identify like some people do have a tendency to overdo once they get started.
mhm,
They have, a tendency like once they start to get declutter, they go to like extremes with it. And I
uh-huh,
feel it kind of piqued my interest as a master's addictions counselor because I'm like, okay, that is somebody not just with a dopamine deficiency, but somebody who is hardwired for addiction, who is seeking that thrill and already knows that rush and has a relationship with that rush.
mhm.
Does that resonate with you? Is that
Yeah, yes, that's another angle that I hadn't thought of before, but it's you have to give some thought to what you really use and love, and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. But
yeah,
the endorphins is I believe it's a little more gentle rush than the dopamine. So
for some brains.
yeah, for some brains, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where you think, instead of, oh, I'm going to declutter all day, you already have in
Mhm.
mind that the reward you're going to give yourself at the end, the walk you're going to take or the movie you're going to go to or whatever. So I don't know, there's a workarounds for everything, and actually our whole lives are just a workaround because we're thinking different thoughts all the time. One thing I want to mention before we get done, is
Mhm.
one of the most valuable things that I came across, or practices, is to sit down for 10 minutes a day. Maybe you might even do it more than once, and just sit there and do nothing. You're not praying, you're not meditating, you're not planning, you're not thinking, you're just sitting there getting bored with yourself. And that's when God can speak to you, because you're not busy.
Hmm.
Exactly. Right.
Y'all can't see, but I'm holding up my coffee cup so Connie can see it. My coffee cup says, "Be still and know."
Yep.
Psalm 46:10. I couldn't
Yes.
agree with you more, Connie.
So I've gotten such incredible insights. Well, even in 10 minutes, it's so astonishing that I wonder, I don't do it every single day. And I'm like, why don't I do this? I mean, this is so enjoyable. And you might remember all of a sudden something that you'd forgotten you needed to do today, or you might see a completely different angle on something. I was looking at my bookshelves the other day in my office, and I'm like, they're a little more jumbled than I think. And I see it as this huge problem. And then all of a sudden, when I'm doing my 10-minute, I'm like, it's just a project. It's, in the overall scheme of things, it's not that big. So get some perspective.
I love that. I love that. Taking time to be in the present, and then perspective shifts happen. Yeah, that's
Right.
great. That's great feedback for our audience. Hey, Direct Impact Nation, I hope that you have listened and listened intently and will utilize some of these workarounds, because they are wonderful. And I mean, like, both Connie and I are here to tell you that decluttering, promotes positivity and creativity and energy and all of those positive things that we're looking for, so we can make a direct impact. So, Connie, before we wrap up, I still want to hear a little bit more about, Clear the Space, Feel the Rush, and where we can find that book.
Okay, thank you. It's all the online bookstores have it available as either an ebook, paperback, or even a hardback. And then it's relatively inexpensive as books go. You can also order it from my website if you'd like to have an autographed copy. I can send you out one.
And
So
that's www.clearthespace.com.
exactly, just
Okay.
like the book, just like it sounds. Yeah.
Wonderful. And you've also, it sounds like, message with people on Twitter.
I haven't done that as much, but
Okay. Okay.
it's more on, a little bit more on Facebook, LinkedIn, and I've started doing some TikTok videos too.
Okay.
So
What's your Instagram handle, Connie?
Instagram, I don't remember.
Okay. Can they find you at Connie Ellefson?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful.
I've got a couple of videos on YouTube too, so I'll be doing more of that. I really like video. That's my dream for my time. So I'm going to be doing more on the video side.
I love that. Well, we will find some of those videos and link to them in our show notes so that people can scroll down and click on some of your videos and check out some of our affiliates and all of that in the process. So again, Direct Impact, we're with Connie Ellefson, and she's got an amazing book, Clear the Space, Feel the Rush. Connie, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you, and want to let you know today you have made a direct impact.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you, Connie. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.